Okay, so we might kick off. I'm sure we'll have a couple more people joining us over the next few minutes, but we'll get going. So look, thanks very much everyone for coming here today on such a sunny evening. It's great to have you. I hope you're all getting comfortable and are relaxed, sitting down to listen to more about the Living Streets Coastal Mobility Route. My name is Ruth Doyle and I work for a company called MCO, and we are managing the non-statutory public consultation process for this project. That means we're running these webinars, we're evaluating the submissions that are coming in, and I'm joined here by my colleague Richie German today, who's going to be assisting with the facilitation of today's webinar. Also here today are a number of members from the project team. We have Conor Geraghty, who's a senior engineer from Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, and he is the director in charge of this particular project. We also have from the design team, John Montgomery from NMP, who are the landscape architects on the project, and then Rory Collins, who is from Barry Transportation Limited, who are the lead engineers on this project and leading the consortium who are part of this group. So for the webinar today, what do we hope to achieve? So really it's for you all to understand a little bit more about the project. So you might have checked out some of the scheme drawings online, and we'll be going through those in more detail today and explaining a bit more about them so you get a better understanding of what we're proposing for the Coastal Mobility Route. And then based on that, you could ask any queries that you have to help clarify things and discuss some of the issues that matter to you. So in terms of asking questions, the way to do that is to hover over the chat button. I'm sure most of you here are familiar with using Zoom, but that is found along the black bar on the very bottom of your screen. And you can type your query into that chat function, and that'll go directly to the project team to view. And we're going to start with presentations, and after those presentations, we'll go through as many of those queries that we get at the end of the webinar. And that's kind of that we find the best way to moderate and get as much discussion and as many queries possible going when we have a large group. And also it means everyone maintains some anonymity when they're posing their questions. So we will be recording this webinar. And that's purely so it can kind of live as a resource on the Dún Laoghaire Citizen Space webpage, which is where we have all the consultation materials. So people who didn't get it, get to come along, can listen back to the bits that matter and that they're most interested in. And then I suppose I would also say that, you know, this is a kind of an information webinar. And after this particular webinar, we really would encourage all of you to go and complete the online consultation form, and we'll share that at the end of the session. And just to zoom out and give a sense of what we're hoping to achieve and what we'll go through today, we'll start after myself, we'll move over to Conor Geraghty from Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown County Council, and he's going to give a bit of background on the Coastal Mobility Route and talk about how the project has evolved and some of the key features of the scheme. Then we're going to move on to the landscape design piece, and we've got John Montgomery here, as I mentioned previously, from NMP, who's going to go over that. And then after that, we'll go into the questions phase. Now, you can post the questions to the team throughout the session as they crop up, or you can note some down and put them to the team at the end. But yeah, we definitely want to hear as many queries as you want. So yeah, do whatever you're comfortable with, but certainly use that chat function to pose those questions directly to the project team. And then myself and Richie will go through those at the end and direct them to the relevant team member, and everyone can stay and listen to that discussion. So I think we'll move on. Conor is up next, so we'll move on to your piece now. Conor, please.
Thanks, Ruth, and good evening, everybody. As Ruth said, my name is Conor Geraghty. I'm Senior Engineer for Active Travel in DLR, and Ruth gave you a broad overview of what I'm going to cover in my webinar. So at a very high level, what the purpose of this scheme is to build on the Coastal Mobility Route that was deployed during COVID, in response to COVID, and to take the good from that scheme, considering all the feedback we got and the research that was done, and to propose a scheme that will improve the finish, connectivity, accessibility and safety of the route. So it hasn't been, while it's been well received, there are some issues that have been identified, so this scheme is hoping to deal with them. And as Ruth mentioned, it's a non-statutory public consultation, and the scheme is being delivered under Section 38 of the Roads Act. So the benefits that the scheme will deliver, as we see it, are better connected communities, and it already provides a mobility option for many of the villages along the coastline. But there are gaps in the network, and this is one of the findings from the TU Dublin report, that there are still bits that deter people, or maybe the less confident people aren't able for, and we're trying to build on that connection and to improve it into a fully segregated route. Excuse me. By providing safer segregated facilities for cycling, it also provides better walking facilities. But in addition to that, we're taking on the recommendations of the TU Dublin report to provide improved crossing points for pedestrians, as well as better linkages to the coastline. Now that we're considering a permanent scheme, which is more of an engineering project, we have an opportunity to look at things like tree planting and landscape features. And so we're looking to provide more greenery and tree planting along the route. And then by providing those mobility options, it does facilitate businesses. And I'll go into that a little bit later in the slides. And overall, by providing sustainable mobility options, it contributes to community well-being, which is one of our key policies within Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown. So there is obviously a strong support in policy, both nationally and locally, but this project in particular aligns with a number of objectives in the County Development Plan, which was adopted in the last 6 months. So these have been highlighted in a number of bullet points, and I'll just go through them. That the summary of the important objectives is to ensure the development of a high quality, fully connected and inclusive walking and cycling network across the county. And this obviously, the good steps have been taken towards a coastal route, and this is to try and build on that. There's also a policy objective to develop the proposed Sutton to Sandycup walkway, which is also a component of the National East Coast Trail, and this is obviously being developed by other local authorities, not just Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown. It's also an objective to ensure that all development proposals should contribute positively to an enhanced public realm, and this relates to things like planting, seating, SUDs or nature-based solutions, not just about mobility options, so that the highest quality of public realm can be achieved in the county. In terms of how we've arrived at this spot, obviously the previous county development plans set down a policy basis for sustainable travel measures. And then in 2020, as part of the response to COVID, a 4.5 kilometre route was deployed along the coastline that required the N31 to be made one way. And of that 4.5 kilometres, 3.6 of it is already segregated. So this was delivered really, really quickly and without any consultation, because there wasn't time. And on foot of that, we engaged with TU Dublin to carry out an independent evaluation of the route to assess whether it had a positive or negative impact, and to make a recommendation about whether or not, after we were emerging from COVID, whether this should be retained. So on foot of the research that was done, it identified that the scheme was very successful and made a number of recommendations, which we've considered as part of the design and development of this project. And in addition to just the Living Streets Coastal Mobility Route, there's also another or two more projects in the Living Streets suite of projects, including the Blackrock, which Part 8 was achieved on the 3rd of July, and the Living Streets Dún Laoghaire project, which we're currently working on proposing the scheme in September. So this aligns with these two projects, and obviously it's in a series of projects to improve the county and the coastline. So in mid-2023, TU Dublin published their third study, and we've taken those recommendations, as I mentioned already, and proposed this non-statutory consultation. And in looking towards the future, that if this scheme is to proceed, we will be looking to do detailed design towards the end of this year, with construction next year. In relation to the coastal route, so this is some of the findings from the TU Dublin report, and it found that it's the highest performing cycle route within DLR County, but also one of the best in the country. So it routinely sees maybe 20,000 cyclists per week, which, to give that some context, the best week that the Waterford Greenway ever had about 6,000 cyclists on it. So even in the depths of winter, it performs much higher than that. Within the first year, it recorded 2 million walking and cycling trips. To give that some context, that's about 5,500 trips to Dún Laoghaire every day. So if these were car trips, there wouldn't be enough parking spaces to facilitate them. So by providing the sustainable options, it means that people that now have the ability to walk and cycle to the town, it means that they don't need a vehicle, and they can also free up space for those that must drive. It resulted in a doubling of the number of cyclists along the route, which is very positive. And it records pedestrian and cycle demand on the route is throughout the day, both during the week and weekends. So it's not a recreational route, it's not a commuter route, it provides both functions, and it does have a diverse range of cyclists. So I'll go into that a little bit more shortly. So TU Dublin did make reference to the cycle network effect. So they were saying that there is very positive outcomes on foot of the route, but that they identified that the lack of connectivity both to the coast and along the coast was a key or one of the things that had to be addressed into the future. So that's why we're proposing to close the segregation on the route as part of this project. As I mentioned already, it does link the coastal villages, and it enabled the introduction of further active travel measures in those villages. And the route itself received an award, a European award from the European Cycle Federation for cycle infrastructure design. So that was, it's getting recognition on a European level, and was the first project in Ireland, I think, to win that award. In terms of the evaluations, so these were carried out by a team of researchers within TU Dublin, and they've published all of their findings on their website. And there's also a number of videos, and you can go into the reports and download them and read through the various different recommendations that they made. The research was published in 3 phases. So the first study covered the Blackrock village and was a socioeconomic and mobility study. And on foot of the recommendation in that study, we proposed the permanent Part 8 scheme, which was, as I mentioned already, adopted on the 3rd of July. So within that study, they did cover mobility along the Coastal Mobility Route, and then follow that up with a more longitudinal study. The phase 2 was September 21 to June 22, and then phase 3 was completed in January this year, and that also included an economic development and business community feedback survey. So some of the information coming out of the study is that there's a good range of age groups. So there, you can see on the left there that 8% of those are children younger than 12. So that's a good indication that children feel comfortable on the route, and it wouldn't be unusual to see primary school children cycling independently along the coast. But also that 6% of users are older than 65. So that it's, again, a route that facilitates older people. There's a good but not a great gender mix. So 36% are female. I think the national average is 24%. So again, that's a good indicator of the quality of the route, but it can be improved. The vast majority of cyclists were categorized as casual users, as distinct to more, say, sporty users who would be there for recreation or for training purposes. So these are people that are just going about their daily lives, doing their commuter function along the route. The research over the 3 reports concluded by saying that the implementation of the coastal route, at least in this important mobility context, can be regarded as very effective up to this point. And on the basis of that research, we proposed this permanent project. In terms of the economic development feedback, one of the businesses along the route reported a significant decline in revenue and credited the one-way system for cars. The remainder of the businesses felt that it was either positive or value neutral in terms of economic impact, but most people that were engaged said that they were either accepting of the route that had been installed or supportive of it, of its retention. And as I'd expect, and including the comments from TU Dublin, most had suggestions for how it could be improved. So coming out of the business, the socioeconomic study, that the finding, there was a number of themes: business development, footfall and turnover. There was reports that there was improved working conditions for staff, that the route provided better opportunities for people to come and go to work. It was credited with tourism and improved links with Dublin and better opportunities for Dún Laoghaire. And a lot of people felt that it had reputational benefit to Dún Laoghaire, that this was a key selling point for Dún Laoghaire as a town. A number of the themes that emerged for things that we need to look at included wayfinding and signage. Obviously, the roadside wayfinding signage had been removed as part of the temporary scheme. There were a number of safety concerns, and these related mostly to pedestrian activity. The lack of loading bays was cited as an issue that needed to be addressed, and the lack of stakeholder engagement at the time of installation as well was a key theme that came out on foot of the research that was done. So in terms of the last 2, the pedestrian and cycle safety, and I'll talk about these more when we get along to the proposals, but that generally the facilities related to pedestrian facilities needing to be better, particularly for those pedestrians crossing over the route. Issues like high speed of cyclists was quoted as being an issue. Loading in and delivery was mentioned as being an issue as well, particularly around the Windsor Terrace area, where there was a lack of existing loading facilities, and they were crediting that as being an issue for their businesses. So just moving on now to the actual scheme that's proposed. So at a high level, the route commences at the N31 on Frascati Road and travels along the coast all the way to the 40-foot. It's over the 4.5 kilometres, or a little bit more than 4.5 kilometres. So the map that you're looking at there, the blue line is the existing segregated facilities along the coastline. And starting on the left, the orange facility, or the orange line, is the proposed new facility. So these are new segregated facilities that are not there at the moment. So what's proposed is a section of new facility linking the N31 at Frascati Road down to the existing coastal route. Then from Colkey Bridge along Crofton Road and Queens Road, linking up with the existing segregation near the East Pier. And then the upgrade of there's an existing contraflow facility on Sandy Cove Avenue West, and to upgrade that to two-way. It's also proposed that retention of the existing blue areas, and then all of these triangles with the pedestrians in them are areas that we've identified pedestrian improvements are required, particularly for crossing the route. Just in relation to this this arrow, it's proposed as part of this scheme to reverse the one-way on Windsor Terrace. This recommendation came on foot of the Living Streets Dunleary traffic management works that were done. So we had carried out a fairly significant traffic modelling exercise in the town. And one of the recommendations was the reversal of the one-way in Windsor Terrace. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the reason it's included in this project is that it does impact the design of the Park Road Junction and the Link Road Junction. So it has to be included in this to show how it would be incorporated into the Living Streets project. So the reasons for the change in direction of traffic was that it would enable people to avoid the Park Road, People's Park Junction, which is under or completely over capacity at the moment. So providing an opportunity for people to get to the coastline at Link Road meant that the westbound traffic didn't have to use George's, or didn't have to come along west towards George's Street. And then by removing that traffic or providing an alternative for that traffic, it will enable us to prioritise bus movements on Glenageary Road lower. The addition, obviously, we would have to provide additional signage to facilitate or to help people understand that change. So in relation to some of the earlier comments I made about loading facilities and the lack of loading facilities, particularly on Windsor Terrace, a new loading bay has been provided in the Baths car park, which has been reopened, and that will hopefully take some of the pressure off in that area. At Newtown Avenue, so this is at the other end of the scheme, so the N31 at Frascati Road is on the left-hand side of that photograph, and what's proposed is the two-way cycle facility on the park side linking to Sea Point Avenue. And excuse me, how that would work is that people travelling along the N31 would continue on the cycle facility and then turn left into the two-way cycle track. If you're coming from Temple Hill or from Newtown Park Avenue side, you would use either a keep left to turn right movement and then join it from the opposite side. So the reason this scheme doesn't take in this full junction is because that the Bus Connect's proposal for the N31 is currently on board Planola, and until we have certainty around the design for that junction, we've shown the bare minimum that would need to be required to incorporate the cycle facility at this location. So generally speaking, along the route, what we're proposing is to replace the existing temporary materials with permanent materials. And this is just a mock-up of what it could look like. So to remove the bollards and rubber curbing and to replace them with a higher quality finish that would last for a number of years. This is just a shot of the proposed pedestrian facilities that are both on the side road, and this is suggested signalised crossing across Sea Point Avenue. And that's in response to trying to provide better facilities for pedestrians on the route. So at this point, I'm going to hand you over to John Montgomery from NMP, and John is just going to talk through the various proposals in terms of landscaping and the design of the public realm along the route. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Connor. I'm just going to share my screen here now seamlessly. There we go. So there are a number of nodes which we've looked at along the Coastal Mobility Route. Some of which Connor has pointed out already, but we're only going to look at a handful of them right now. The first one which we're going to zoom in on is Longford Terrace, so the entrance to the DART station. And really what we've done here is try to make a much tighter entrance into the DART station and the adjacent residential area. We've incorporated raised tables for safer pedestrian crossing points. made the junction a lot tighter, and by consequence, what's arisen from that is kind of created a little bit more of an entrance feel and an entrance experience into the zone, but also provides us with additional planting. So we've reduced the amount, there's a huge amount of concrete down there at the moment. We've reduced the extent of concrete in that area and providing additional planting, which obviously is always a positive element. The next zone which we're looking at is Crofton Road. So what we're proposing here is a two-way segregated bike lane. So you can see in this plan that we have the existing pedestrian route along by the wall and the trees, and then we're proposing to have a cycle lane, two-way cycle lane, which runs along. That actually splits as it moves up before it comes to the bus stop. So you have space for pedestrians to board and disembark from buses themselves. And the idea here, it's technically it's a tricky solution, but we're looking at a no dig solution to actually provide the bike path. So you have that bike path running through the trees themselves, and it's very similar to what was done in Bidderstown Park in the last few years. So basically, we try not to impede any of the root growth of the actual trees themselves, and segregate them out using planting where we can, and that's something that we try to do to separate pedestrians and vehicular traffic also. Queen's Road itself, what we're looking at doing is providing a new segregated route down on the lower part. So this really helps connecting and creating a safer kind of route down away from the upper road itself. The surface materials will be high quality surface materials down here, so it's a nice kind of node within the public realm. So using materials very similar to what's in the metals itself. We're providing additional seating, and also alongside that will be bike parking as well. So it acts as kind of a bike hub as well, and secure surveilled area for people to be able to park. The next area that we're looking at is Marine Parade, and the landscaping here is very much trying to utilize a successful space and encourage people down into it, creating safer space which is removed from the actual traffic itself and protects from that. It provides opportunities for overlooking the actual sea itself. It's retaining the picnic tables which are in there and already used very successfully as well. And this is very much inspired by that kind of craggy coastline that we have along Dún Laoghaire particularly. And you can kind of begin to see that in the way that the paving pattern is utilized, but also we've made it quite playful as well. You can see in the areas back through here. So people can sit and children can kind of rummage around on those rocky outcrops as well. And really bringing some of that planting into play to help kind of, like we say, shelter from the actual road on the other side and create a more enclosed space. Sandy Cove Harbour itself, the idea in this area is to make a more kind of formal plaza area. So access at the moment would be as is, it would be for residents only. You'd still retain the casual trading and the mobility impaired car parking spaces just down where my cursor is right now. So we'll be upgrading the actual surface finishes in here using, again, the same materials consistent with what's been used around in the area and in the metals as well. And giving it a much more kind of a greater sense of place and how that works. You can see the bollards wrapping around the edge to prevent parking in the zone, and very much making this a pedestrian spill out area for an area that's very, very, very well used right now. It would obviously include bike stands as well to support the Costal Mobility Route, and the seating opportunities also within that. And that's just a view of how we see that coming together as well. So you can see the access is still retained, and the bollards brought in just to help to prevent any kind of parking on the sides there. And I'll just pass on to Ruth now.
Thanks, John. Yeah, thanks very much. So we got a couple of questions coming in there now, and we've a few recorded, and we might just start going through them at the moment. So I'm just going to share a screen actually for 1 second, because I think some of the slides are going to help us answer some of these questions that are coming through. So bear with me a second. So there was one question which was, about the TUD study. So we're going to start with that one, and that was around how we define cycling trips. And I think that is in relation to this slide here. So there's a slide that says, you know, the route recorded 2 million cycling and walking trips, and there was a query on what is a cycling trip. So Conor, I don't know, you're probably most familiar with the TUD report. Would you be able to?
Yeah, so the 2 million walking and cycling trips were recorded by the counters that are along the route. So we have pedestrian and cycle counters that pick up pedestrians that pass a point and cyclists that pass a point. So if they were on a bike or they were walking, that was considered a trip. But that's distinct to, that's just the record of numbers that we gathered. So the TU Dublin report then, when they were monitoring things like the age profile or the type of trip, they actually did intercept surveys at 3 different times. So I think it was in October, November, in 3 consecutive years. So they stopped people and asked them what they were doing and what type of trip they were. So there are 2 things there, but the reference to the 2 million trips is relating to the permanent counters we have along the route and what they picked up.
Okay, great. And then a related query then on the date of that study and whether or not there's been a survey on mobility since the end of COVID.
Yeah, so it depends what you consider the end of COVID, but the final TU Dublin report was towards the end, January 23 was the last time that they gathered data. Now I'd have to check the exact report to get the date, but certainly post any lockdown or any restrictions on movement, and sort of back to more normal patterns.
Okay, great. There's another question, and there's quite a lot of detail in it, but it's around Longford Terrace. So I might just bring up, I'll just bring up that slide on Longford Terrace to answer that query. Okay, so this is around what considerations might have been given to having parallel pedestrian and cycle lane crossing priority with a stop lane on the station side of the crossing. And I think it was felt that it says here there's a kink in the cycle lane which is blocked by a car, and that might be a potential issue. So I don't know, maybe Rory, if this is kind of to do with the bike lane design, would it make sense for you to take this one?
Sure, yeah. And that question mentions some examples that are in the National Cycle Manual as well, which is a new document, and it gives you a few different suggestions for how to deal with situations like this. And there is a lot of space available here, so we're looking at moving cyclists away from the road just to manage that conflict. The idea would be that the car doesn't stop on blocking that route, that there's a full car length, so that when there's at the stop line, they pass the conflict point and cyclists can still get across. So it is something that we will revisit all these things just to make sure that they work and they are safe, and there'll be a few extra road safety audits done on these just to make sure we have the details right and we get that level of increased safety here.
Yeah, I might add to that as well, Rory, that the idea with the kind of the bend in the cycle track is to provide 5 meters of space so that a car is not trying to cross the path of the pedestrians to a cycle track and get into the lane of traffic as well. So it provides space for them to cross this two-way cycle track and stop, not blocking the cycle track. And then the opposite is true, where they're turning right in, that they can turn right and clear the traffic behind them, but then stop and check for people on the cycle track. So that's where the designs are heading. I think some of the comments related to about a loss of priority, but pedestrians and cyclists would maintain priority across that side road.
Okay, thanks Conor and Rory for that. We might just move on to some queries that were on the actual finish of the bike lane, and there was one question on whether or not greening measures can be used as a buffer between cycle lanes and the traffic, you know, that felt it might be more forgiving and more attractive. And then equally there was another query that said many of the scheme visualizations do not show the bollards or wayfinders that will be required at the start of and the end of sections. What style of bollard will be installed? So they're both a similar theme.
Yeah, I can take those as well.
Yeah.
I suppose this isn't, or the visualizations aren't detailed design. They're just a guide to help people understand what it is we're talking about. So we haven't decided on the quality of the finish in the same way we haven't decided about the exact width or height of the curb yet. I suppose if we're proceeding with this project, there was things that we would have to work out, but we try to avoid the bolt down flexi bollards that are in a lot of the route, and try and maintain. It does pass Monkstown, which is an architectural conservation area, so whatever is proposed, which should be in keeping with the quality of the area that it's passing through. In relation to the first query, I would agree that providing a green barrier between the traffic lanes and the cycle lanes is generally what we would like to do, and that's what we've done in other schemes like Dún Laoghaire Central. In this case, you need a certain bare minimum width of space to be able to provide measures like SUDs or nature-based solutions, because if it's too narrow, it gets hard to maintain. So we're happy to look at that, but we think that there isn't as much space to provide that metre or so of width to provide good quality planting, and then it would only end up being low level planting, which can cause issues for maintenance and for people getting to try and litter pick, etc. in them.
And just to add to that, Conor, that one of the considerations while placing those green areas was for the sustainable urban drainage, was to try and capture the runoff water, so it would become collected in these areas instead of flowing into the stormwater drainage system, which means trying to put them at low points in the road, so that the water flows there as opposed to the gullies. So in a lot of cases, that's actually, that low point is between the pedestrians and the cyclists rather than between the cyclists and the traffic, which was just one of the considerations, just to try and reduce the environmental impacts of the scheme.
Okay, and there was a query here, and maybe this is about kind of the broader projects that are happening simultaneously with the CMR, and it was around Blackrock and connections to Blackrock. And it said the existing one-way segregated counterflow on Newtown Avenue in Blackrock should be extended all the way into Blackrock Village and be upgraded to a segregated two-way cycle path. This will allow more casual users easy and safe access to and from Blackrock Village, while still allowing cycling commuters access to the N11. Rory or Conor, do you want to respond to that one, please?
Yeah, I can respond, Rory. So that is part of the Part 8, to continue the counterflow all the way to the village, which was adopted. So we're proceeding to detailed design and construction on that project. As to whether it would be widened up to a two-way cycle track, if you were to widen it beyond its current width, you would have to remove the parking on the road. And obviously some of the residents there don't have off-street parking. And as part of the project, that the traffic volumes on Newtown Avenue are much lower now that the village has been made one way, and that the width flow towards the village is provided as a shared on-road option. Obviously, it's not part of this plan, but it is that joint up thinking is happening.
Okay, great. There's a query here around, traffic safety and speed in parallel to the Coastal Mobility Route, and what consideration has been given to narrowing roads and slowing traffic in parallel to the CMR.
Do you mean on the likes of, is it referring to, say, Monkstown Road? Or...
Yeah, I think it's the roads. So much of basically all the roads that occur in parallel to the CMR, how can we ensure that cars don't bomb along those roads? So it's kind of a safety query.
Yeah, it's obviously outside the scope of this scheme route.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's something that we could look at separately. And I know there are discussions with some areas along where speeds are identified as being higher than the posted speed limit.
Okay, cool. Query on Sandy Cove. So it says the proposal has no route continuing through the proposed pedestrian area, and I think this is just at Sandy Cove Beach. A cycle lane should be maintained through to the 40-foot. The shared space isn't considered best practice. I'm just wondering, about cyclists and pedestrians merging in that space and how you see that figure working out in practice. Yeah,
I suppose we would consider that as being the destination rather than as a through route. If the route was to continue on towards, say, Dalkey and other areas, it more than likely should continue along the road rather than being diverted around the 40-foot. So the idea about a shared space, I would agree with that comment that it's not best practice, but that's not how we would see the route. If you were going to the 40-foot, that you'd be cycling as a destination, you might be locking your bike there rather than continuing through it. If you were to mark it out as a two-way segregated facility, that has a knock-on impact on other issues like disabled parking bays in the area and other parking for residents as well. So there is an impact to doing that. And if the route was to continue in the East Coast Trail format and head further down along the coastline, then it should be taking space from the road rather than the pedestrian areas. Excuse me.
Okay. We have a query on Crofton Road and what is happening to car parking spaces along that road. And I think possibly the visual we showed didn't actually show the bird's eye view, so maybe that's where that query arises.
Yeah, so the parking is being maintained on Crofton Road. We're narrowing the carriageway slightly to provide a landing area outside the existing curb line. So at the moment, if you park your car heading towards Dún Laoghaire and you step out, you're stepping into grass. So we're providing an area there for people, a hard standing area that they can step onto, just as a place to land. But the parking is being maintained with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 spaces to provide SUDS measures or tree planting.
Okay, great. There's a query here, and I might need to clarify, but I think it's around access to houses. So it says, how do you ensure the safety for the houses that require right-of-way vehicle access into and out of their property across the 2-way cycle lane? So I think that's just how we ensure cars can turn effectively in and out of their driveways if they're positioned on next to or by the bike lane.
Yeah, so the responsibility there would be if you're turning across the paths of the cyclists, the responsibility would be with the car driver to do it safely. If it's referring to enough space for the vehicle to turn, we generally auto-track vehicle turning movements. And when the scheme was rolled out as a temporary scheme, there were situations where it was too tight, and we modified curb lines to suit and to make sure people can get in and out. But the scheme is not proposing to restrict access for anybody, but that if you are turning a vehicle across the cycle lane, the responsibility is with the driver to proceed with caution.
Okay, great. There's a question around, flow of cyclists on the lane, and one is around whether or not any advanced cycling lights will be included in the plan. And then another one, which is around speeding on the bike lane and how we can kind of deter that.
So in relation to speed, so the cyclists are permitted to travel the posted speed limit if they're physically able to do that. So the posted speed limit on the N31 at the moment is 50 kph, which is I would accept far faster, but there is no, even if it was reduced to 30, it would require a bylaw change, which is outside the scope of this project. But some of the graphics that we showed there, we are proposing improved pedestrian facilities that include ramped areas across the cycle track. So that would require the cyclist to slow when going over the ramp. So that will provide traffic calming. The other query, Ruth, was in relation, what was the second query?
It's around advanced traffic lights for cyclists.
So it depends. Is that asking if it's going to detect oncoming cyclists early and catch a green?
Yeah, I think it's around sequencing. It says, my question is whether any advanced cycling lights will be included in the plan, particularly at the crossroads close to the DART station at Crofton Road and Marine Road.
So we do have early start cycle lights at a number of the junctions where you get, say, 3 seconds head start before the general traffic lanes. So we usually provide them where cyclists and vehicles are moving at the same time, and that there's a potential conflict there to give the cyclist a head start. But with this scheme, it's fully segregated the whole length of it, so they're not as necessary. But what we do include is radar detection that detects an oncoming cyclist and calls the signal early for them, in the hope that if it's in the right sequence, that they would get a green light when they arrive, and then they don't lose momentum. So they're in operation at some of the junctions already, but we would hope to extend that as part of this project.
Okay. There was a query on trees on Crofton Road, and as how many will be retained, or will any need to be felled to accommodate the plan?
So we're proposing to retain them all, and the only caveat to that is that on foot of the arboricultural survey, if they've detected a diseased tree or one that's has a short, sometimes they categorize the life of a tree. So if they're saying that it'll last less than, say, 3 or 5 years, then we would fell them if they're diseased or they have other issues. But generally, we don't need to remove any trees to facilitate the scheme.
Okay, there's a query on accessibility and wheelchair users, and to what extent wheelchair users of these spaces have been considered. And this kind of concern that there is a lot of focus on cars and cyclists, and how can we accommodate those needs within the scheme design?
Does it in which space?
There's no particular space. It's just in general, how can you accommodate wheelchair users of the general spaces? I think in and around the Costal Mobility Route, I suppose one thing would be around the wheelchair parking spaces, but maybe also the fact that there are better improved crossings and fewer less trip hazards. I think those will be the kind of points.
But I think that's something the TU Dublin report really was very strong on, that there was a lot that could be done in terms of pedestrian improvement, particularly step-free pedestrian crossings where you didn't have to go up and down. And even the graphic that's shown there, the two westbound crossings over the Dart Station and Longford Terrace would be flush, which would improve facilities for people, say, in wheelchairs. And then the signalised crossing north-south would provide a fully signalised crossing with push buttons for people crossing the road where the vehicles would be. So there's a number of those crossings proposed along the scheme as well, which would improve facilities for everybody.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, Conor, certainly on Marine Parade, that the space had been made much more accessible, and we had comments back originally just about the opportunity for larger kind of trikes to be able to access that as well and stop, but also the provision of turning for that. So they're being taken into consideration and in other areas as well.
Okay, thanks, John. There's a query around Dalkey, and I think it's about, connectivity with Dalkey. It says, this is a great facility, most welcome. When continuing on to Dalkey, is there any idea when there might be planning for that? I think it's about, how people can continue the cycle onto Dalkey.
If it's suggesting continuing something like the coastal route as the East Coast Trail, I think the plan, or the overarching plan in the GTA cycle network, is to connect Sandy Cove to Wicklow. So that is the ambition, that we would have a route the full length of the coast. As to when, there are a number of, I suppose, difficulties trying to get from the 40-foot down towards Wicklow. So it's not a live project for us at the moment, but I know Wicklow County Council are looking at it. There was recent work carried out at Corbourne Lane around flood protection, and we've provided some footpaths there. A number of rail crossings would be required. It's not that straightforward, but it would have to be a project in itself, and probably a cross-county project between ourselves and Wicklow. But it is there in the plans as an objective.
Okay, thanks, Conor. There's a query on the crossing of Crofton Road and Harbour Road, that the road is narrow, and will the space be taken from the footpath? Do you guys understand what the meaning of that question, Rory or Conor? Maybe if I bring up the
I think this is referring to Colkey Bridge. Rory, would that be your?
I think so, yes, that's where it is the narrowest.
So I saw some of the comments around Colkey Bridge, and we did look at a number of options at Colkey Bridge. So that junction arrangement at the moment is not particularly efficient, and is joined by Clarence Street, which has the 4-6A bus route, which obviously we're trying to promote those active or the sustainable modes. So we looked at a number of different iterations for Crofton Road, one of them being a one-way system. So the positive side to a one-way system would be, obviously, the more space could be given over to the active modes. The negative would be the impact on the bus service. So there was, as part of the Living Streets Dún Laoghaire project, there was a number of discussions about bus routing in the town, and one of the suggestions was that we would divert the 4-6A around the town rather than coming down York Road, that it would go around Glenageary Road lower. But the NTA weren't in favour of that proposal. So then the query would be whether or not it would continue on its current route down Georgia Street. So if you made Crofton Road one way, that would undermine the objective to pedestrianise the main street, because it would have nowhere to go. So then the bus would have to be totally diverted, which would undermine the Bus Connects plan. Alternatively, it could do a loop of the harbour, but again, that wasn't particularly, the NTA weren't particularly enamoured by that idea. So what's proposed is that the road would remain two-way, and that the segregated facility would be continued through, but the junction arrangement would be changed to almost like a shuttle system. And there is a section of the footpath that has to be narrowed to facilitate that. So that's a section on the corner. Currently, there's quite a large ESB pole there that would have to be moved, but that's how it's been facilitated through that location.
Okay, thanks, Conor. And another kind of one around the design of the broader connectivity and the bike network, which is connectivity for cyclists into Georgia Street and Dún Laoghaire, and what's been done around the design of that in this scheme to help with that connectivity up to Dún Laoghaire town.
Yeah, so the connection into sort of reconnecting the main street with the seafront is a long-standing ambition in the urban framework plan and the various iterations of the county development plan, and it is a really tricky thing. So the if you look at the lexicon, and the access from the lexicon through to Hague Terrace and up to Georgia Street was specifically designed to try and reconnect, and the connection through the People's Park up to Georgia Street again was another important connection. More recently, the niche living, which is beside Harbour Square, provided a stepped connection up, which is a set of steps rather than a ramped connection. So we are looking to try and improve those connections. There is also a connection at I think it's Wellington Street, where you can connect up from the seafront. So we are working on those connections, but it is a tricky thing because the area had become so impermeable through development down through the years. But the point is valid that we should try and improve those connections.
Okay, perfect. There's a query around parking and illegal parking around Sandy Cove Beach area, in particular to the proposed share space, and how we could deter illegal parking in that particular zone.
Yeah, so as the Roads Authority, there are a number of things, there are a number of tools that we have, you know, clearway signage, double yellow lines, parking enforcement zones, and illegal parking is an issue across the country and the world rather than just, you know, something that's in Sandy Cove. We can design it to restrict access to vehicles, but the areas where there are access to vehicles can result in illegal parking at the wrong times. So we as the Roads Authority can designate areas to be illegal to park, in which case then it would fall to our parking wardens or the Gardaí.
Okay. Got it. And I think we've covered a lot of ground there. I think we've got most questions. I'm coming to the kind of the end of the list that we have here. There was one query on just general public awareness around informing pedestrians to stay off cycle lanes. I think it's just, yeah, generally to try and delineate the difference between the bike lane and the pedestrian space, probably from a safety perspective as well.
Yeah, I suppose that's it's an ongoing issue with modes being in spaces that are intended for other modes. So along the coastal route, there's a vertical step between the footpath and cycle track. The cycle track is coloured differently. It's also got cycle logos and other indications on it that it's a cycle facility. But it is a fair point, Ruth, that, you know, I've encountered people running on the route or walking on the route, but you would hope that the two-way cycle facility is wide enough to allow people to pass if they encounter those sort of people.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Conor. And there was just one more I know Richie, my colleague, picked up on. So Richie, would you mind just reading out that extra question, and then we'll leave it at that and we'll do a quick wrap up.
Actually, Ruth,
yeah,
it was the last question you asked. So we
okay. Oh, perfect. Okay,
yeah.
I'm one step ahead. Okay, yeah. That's great. And I'm just gonna zoom on to the end of the presentation now. I mean, hopefully you all will have learned more about the scheme than you knew before you showed up today. As I said, it was an information webinar, but it is part of this broader non-statutory public consultation, and the consultation is open for a 6-week period, so that means it will be closing on the 11th of August. We do have another webinar next week, so that's on Tuesday. It'll be the same as this, so it's only really if you want to kind of spread word, you know, someone else who might want to go along or who couldn't make it tonight. That'll be happening next Tuesday the 18th at 7 p.m. We do have the online survey, and Richie can post the link to that survey now. So, you know, having kind of listened to the discussion tonight and having had a better sense of what scheme design is proposing, it'd be great if you could fill that survey in now and provide a response and highlight some of the kind of suggestions and issues that you have. And this is for consideration really in the detailed design phase. So after the public consultation, we'll be evaluating all the feedback that comes through, and that will be fed into the detailed design stage, with a view to construction expected to start in early 2024. So I suppose just to say thanks very much everyone for coming along tonight.